Hello, everyone, and welcome to this Placer AI webinar on retail innovation. I'm thrilled to be doing this specific topic today. It's one that we haven't done in the past. And, so if we're going to do something a little bit off our beaten track, we're going to do it with a good friend. So I'm thrilled to be joined by Jesse Michael, the SVP of Digital Solutions at JLL. Jesse, thank you so much for joining us. And why don't you give us that 1-minute background on you and what you're doing over at JLL?
Yeah, thanks, Ethan, and thanks for having me. Digital Solutions Advisory was born out of a number of conversations across, I would say, the retail industry with retailers, specifically CRE groups, QSR restaurants, in terms of just the inundation of technology and technology providers and technology vendors out there, and not only that, but how technology vendors and providers fit into a holistic solution. And me, along with my business partner, Lee Jackson at JLL, bring a different sort of unique spin to the advisory role and advisory game, if you will. That's the best word, around finding best-in-class technology providers in those different areas and bringing them to market, or helping to bring them to market. And not only that, but help them fit into more of a holistic solution and holistic roadmap.
Amazing, and a perfect example of why you're here joining us on this specific topic today. So a quick look at what we're going to be doing today. We're going to start with a very brief introduction to Placer for those of you who are unfamiliar. We are going to then break down the innovation focus on 3 categories. The first is the next big thing. So big topics that we're hearing a lot about. How big are they? Trying to contextualize these. Then we're going to look at trend alignment. So some of the innovations that are kind of aligning with the key trends we're already seeing in retail. And finally, overcoming obstacles, the responses to specific challenges that we're seeing and how innovation is a piece of that. And then, as always, we will get to a Q&A. If at any point throughout the webinar you have a question, please plug that into the Q&A button situated at the top or bottom of your screen, depending on how you have Zoom configured. And we will try to get to them either throughout the course of the conversation or at the end. Again, the introduction to Placer. So Placer is a location data company. What does that mean? People vote with their feet. We show you how they vote across the country to retail locations every single day. We do that by observing a panel of over 30 million devices. Very critically, this is all anonymized aggregate data, so we are GDPR and CCPA compliant. We then analyze that data with machine learning and AI algorithms and present it in a wealth of different reports within our platform on everything from true trade areas, cross-shopping, customer journey, competitive benchmarking, and a whole lot more. For those of you who are interested, we have a free version of our premium product available at placer.ai. We also have a section called The Square, which is the home of our free tools. So please go check that out if you are interested. But now into the content, because that is what we are here for. So someone asked about the deck being shared. If you email me afterwards, I will make sure to get you the deck. It's ethan@placer.ai. The recording will be available at the same link. If you just plug in your information, it'll pop up as a YouTube link tomorrow. So if you want to share it or watch it again, because I mean, how could you not want to watch this more than once? Please feel free to do so. All right, so let's start with the next big thing. And Jesse, we're starting off with one of my favorite topics. People who have been on past webinars have heard me talk about this ad nauseum. So obviously the best place to start. Retail media networks, they are a key element of maximizing the potential of the store, at least according to the opinion of some, including myself. How big do you think this trend is and why?
I don't think you need to hear it from me. It's huge, and we can see the data on the screen. It's especially huge with the decline of cookie tracking, right? I mean, the whole ecosystem changed a number of months ago, and the ability for retailers and different groups to tap into that first party data and leverage that in an advertising mechanism is, to me, not only just the wave of now, but the wave of the future. How big it gets, I think that's probably the more of the discussion, because obviously there's going to be a supply and demand conversation that needs to happen, and how much supply is there? Do you run out of it based on the demand there from consumers? But I mean, in terms of your original question, it's, I think it is, specifically where retailers need to be focusing right now.
Yeah, I mean, by the way, the ad point is a really important one. I do think that the really interesting thing here is not just the ability to kind of look at retail locations on on a kind of place by place basis. So
Right.
if I'm thinking about Albertsons in kind of the, in California versus Albertsons in Oregon, I can have a different approach. I can even segment stores. So the idea of finding those places that reach specific audiences, I think we're going to uncover a whole lot of unique levels of customized targeting that we can do within these locations. And because it's in store, it's the eyeballs, and it's the eyeballs at that point of intent, which is, I think, that challenge with offline to online is always, how do you get them when they're excited? Where, as you know, if you do like search terms online, you have that intent. Being in the store is really interesting. And I think that combo of factors is super interesting, especially like what you talked about, the kind of the challenges with some of the online advertising that we've been so used to.
Yeah.
I want to talk about one that's, cashierless checkout, right? Very, very big topic, super exciting, gets a lot of awareness from like kind of a media headline play. Why are we so keen to get away from the cashier? And is there really a big win for cashierless checkout?
I don't know if we're trying to get away from the cashier, but I think we're all just trying to find more time, trying to find convenience in our lives. And I think that's a fairly simplistic statement, or obvious, I guess maybe is the right word, but everyone's trying to find more time. And if there's a way to speed up the ability for me to go in as a busy parent, or just a busy person in general, and grab a number of different items and walk out. I mean, I don't know if it's necessarily avoiding the cashier. I know personally sometimes it's nice to say hello to someone in the store, but there's a lot of cases where you go in and you're in a rush and there's a line of 12 people and you're stuck. So that would be, I don't know if you share that same sentiment around, are we trying to get away from the cashier? Are we trying to save, is there cost savings moving away from the cashier? Maybe, but then you're implementing a whole whack load of technology. So I think for the consumer, it's probably more about convenience. And then there's obviously a number of benefits from the data side that we can jump into for sure.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's kind of what I want to talk about. So like cashierless checkout is super interesting. This idea you can walk in, just walk out. It's really, really cool. Cashierless has been around. I mean, there's other ways of doing it. Obviously, it's not as quick, certainly. And I do think, you talk about something that's so important. If we think about like Amazon Go, like this kind of, mini mart kind of experience, get in, get out in the middle of the day, I think there's a huge value out there. I struggle to see how the big win here is just walk out. And for me, the kind of bigger play is, by the way, apropos what we were just talking about, the media networks, is the data piece. How do you view it?
I agree. It's, if you think about that first party data that we talked about previously in the media networks, I mean, this isn't going to be for every single retailer, this type of technology, but the amount of first party data you're gaining on the customer that can then feed into all of your ad networks, your sponsorships, everything else, basically those platforms, it's huge. I mean, the monetization appetite here, or the monetization opportunity here is amazing. The personalization opportunity here to speak more one-to-one to your customer based on specifically what they're purchasing. I mean, that's the play. Whether that counterbalances the investment effort in the technology, I'm not sure. I think that probably remains to be seen. But to me, that's the play, is more so the data side on the customer. I don't know if you'd agree with that. I
mean, I agree with you completely. I think when you think about how thin those margins are in grocery and how the addition of technology, it's a lot of cameras to make a store operate that way. It's not as simple as we're making it sound of like, oh, just implement it and then it's over. I think the upside of the data play is where the excitement should be around this, because it allows us to think so differently about the store itself. And it's this kind of balance of make it good for the consumer so that we can kind of make this data play work. And I think that's where you're going to see, Amazon is a very smart company. I think this is one of those really brilliant moves. I agree with you completely. It's about the data.
For sure.
So now let's talk about another kind of big trend. This is kind of maybe the headline grabber of the last few months, the metaverse. I mean, it's not NFTs quite, but it is the metaverse. And so, I mean, how do you define the metaverse? And how big of a deal do you think it will be in the next 5 to 10 years? So I'm not tomorrow, because I think we both agree it won't be a big deal.
Yeah.
And not, in the, when we have flying cars, but in this next, like this near term period.
I mean, the definition's tough. I think if you even talk to people at Meta, you try and get a definition of it, everybody's got something else to say. So I'm not going to sit here and say I'm an expert on the Metaverse by any means. But I don't necessarily buy all the hype that's going into it. I think to your point, is this happening in the next 5 years? Most likely not. I've spoken to a few people at Meta, one close friend's there, and he's working on specific projects within this. And he said exactly that. We're going to be at a point in probably maybe 8 to 10 years where this does become relevant. And I think there are some use cases for it. If you look at shopping centers, you look in that world, there could be a potential way to, showcase storefronts in a beautiful way as you wander through a shopping center, tier 1, tier 2 centers, and having stores, showcase products in their storefront. Like there's a whole storefronts angle to this. Walmart talked about storefronts a number of years ago. And I think if you're, much as the websites become a storefront for you, Metaverse could be used as a bit of a storefront as well, and being able to showcase different products. Do I think it'll drive commerce scale? What some are saying, I'm not so sure. But definitely there's a showcase of products here that could be relevant.
Super interesting. I actually never really thought about that storefront idea. And I think that's a really smart way of looking at it, of this, a much more engaging experience. I also like the idea of what are the elements, at least in the, in that 5 to 10 year period, because I think the next few years we're just going to see testing, is what are the things that can automatically improve either the online or the offline shopping experience. So like, you and I will pull back the curtain. We've spoken before. And like one of the things, we're talking about is like, hey, see how a couch fits within a space. Like, that's a really cool idea. See what a paint color looks like on a wall. Like, I think some of these ideas are actually really, really interesting. They're not like, it's not like the metaverse, for itself. It's the metaverse as a way of complementing channels that already exist.
Yeah. And I would agree that, the one I get super excited about is exactly what you said, with Amazon's AR view, and others are doing this too, where you can put the specific couch and design in your space and it fits to the exact dimensions, and you can see how the color clashes with, from a design perspective, an interior piece. That's really exciting. I mean, Snap's done a lot of work on their lens product, their AR lens product. You can see the specific shoe on your foot, see if you like it, the specific pair of pants you're wearing before you even go in the store. There's a lot to that sort of stuff that helps the pre-shop. And maybe Metaverse, that's another thing here, where it's not actually maybe physically purchasing the products. There will be an aspect to it of that for sure, but it helps more potentially with the pre-shop and actually planning your trip to those specific stores. That could be, a way this goes as well.
That's a great point. And I mean, even think about like augmenting the looking for a store experience within a mall, like you have those big touch screens. Like, could you be, I think there's ways to leverage this in the short term in ways that will benefit what its 5 to 10 and 10 plus year potential is, but it has to have that piece. Otherwise we're going to end up with, these things take a while. Like, it's not so quick. And I think sometimes we get really excited and then it disappoints. And it's not because the technology is not good. It's not there yet. And it does take a lot of time.
Right.
And now let's go into like the second group of kind of innovations. And this is kind of what we call like alignment with market trends. And the first, and maybe kind of the, there's obviously a lot of elements of this, but we talk about omnichannel, we talk about curbside pickup, delivery. This is obviously a big thing that's happening, almost like seen as a given. What do you think the next evolution of omnichannel is? Curbside, how do you see those things evolving?
It's a heavy question. I mean, everyone's trying to figure this out, especially, given the status of the world over the last couple of years. There was a huge push that nobody saw coming towards curbside pickup, as we all know, again, stating the obvious. But I think you saw a huge shift that people weren't necessarily ready for. We'd seen it a lot in curbside programs, specifically at shopping centers. No one in their right minds expected shopping centers to close down, or, retailers to shutter from that sense. and retailers were scrambling and tenants were scrambling to get their products available on their site through either a local inventory feed or whatever that was to make those products available curbside. So, I mean, the gains that have been made over the last couple of years in terms of omnichannel and curbside and the importance of it and where delivery is going, you're continuing to see things being tested, as we're coming out of pandemic times, and there is a return, as you've shown with a lot of the data, Placer shown with a lot of the data, there is a return to centers and return to retailers and return to restaurants. I mean, Brookfield's trying something interesting with Curbside and a program called Curbside with Sephora, where it's at specific assets, but if you order products from Sephora, they've got a runner team that can actually go in and pick up the products as you're pulling up. They bring the products out to you. It's nothing new, but I think people are still continuing to dabble in it and learn what the right mix is, because I think a couple of years ago it was very much we need to push towards this, and now people are pulling back a bit and trying to find that balance between, we want to push people into the retail shops or into the centers versus bringing the products out to them. That would be my initial thought anyways.
Yeah, I think this next, it's obviously an important element to have. Like, it's almost like it's becoming a must have. Like, you must have this option for those that want it. Mm-hmm. But I think what's interesting is how do retailers figure out ways to maximize it, or shopping centers. Like, I think one of the challenges is if I do curbside, like, that's my purchase. Like, I went in, I get it. And obviously there's nothing wrong with that, but I want to have this kind of upsell opportunity from the location. I want to create that wider element. So how do I get someone, quick parking, but they can come through the store and maybe pick up a few items? How do I kind of encourage something a little bit more? I think that's going to be a big piece of it. And I think the more we think about that space interaction, like, what's the benefit to it, we'll find these other areas to unlock. But I agree with you. I think curbside is super critical. It's a must have. But I think we probably saw the peak of it's the reason people go, and now it's gonna be forced to figure out, all right, how do we actually make this better?
Yeah, and don't forget the investment in it as well, right? So you've got people that need to run this. There's investment in people. There's been labor shortages, as it's been well documented, across North America and into Europe. I mean, the staffing angle of that is another component to this, in terms of an operational expense that groups need to weigh, whether that's worth, is the juice worth the squeeze? Essentially, if there's a break even there, I guess, from a curbside standpoint of the benefit, you want to offer it to people, but if only 6 people are using it, what's the operational expense there? You break even before you pull the program. So that's where it's tough to say where it goes. It's probably case by case.
That's a great point on the labor side. I wonder if, look, we saw delivery costs start to rise, and there was obviously, that was something that a lot of people expected. But I wonder if with kind of curbside, we start seeing it be a little bit more limited. So you can do curbside, but it's these hours. You can do curbside, but it's on, in these periods. And then that convenience versus I want it now conversation starts to shift a little bit, but it'll be, I think there's, yeah, it's interesting. You think about how the curbside demand has been there, but if we period of labor shortages, that kind of exacerbates that problem.
Yeah, and getting into you mentioned delivery, we didn't even touch on that. The interesting piece in terms of iterations. I mean, you're going to see, I think, a lot more, and we've seen this on our side. We're speaking to a couple of different groups that really specialize in delivery times. So, not this, delivered in 2 days, and it's someone just chucking the package onto your front doorstep and walking away. It's more about giving the customer the option of when they want the products delivered as well. So there's going to be times available for those products to be delivered, especially in luxury. I mean, that'll be the interesting segment to watch, I think, on how this all evolves. I think a lot of luxury have been potentially hesitant to do delivery. There's a lot of factors with that, obviously, but I think you're going to see a lot more platforms show up, or ones that do exist offer that selective timing to allow customers to make sure that, hey, they're out in the morning, but they're there in the afternoon. They want their package delivered then. They can select that specific time versus this, delivered in the next 2 days. And it shows up whenever, you know?
Yeah, I mean, that's the problem. I mean, with delivery or curbside there's an element of impulse. And if we lose that element of impulse of like, hey, I need this now, it's going to be a challenge, especially for a lot of different segments. Obviously, certain plan ahead things are already going to happen online in an effective manner. I wanted this is obviously a topic that you and I both love, and it's the idea of like the mall as a platform. And I think we generally think about the mall as like a physical space, and that is kind of made up of all these parts that make it its whole. It's like the retailers that matter most. But I do think that there's this idea of like the mall as this digitally accessed platform. The mall as a brand in and of itself is like a really important trend. Do you think this trend is important? And what do you think it could mean for retail moving forward?
I mean, I think it's probably the utmost importance to ensure the long-term viability of shopping centers and real estate groups, and not just shopping centers, but downtown districts, downtown cores, BIAs, high streets, you name it. I think the connection to the consumer from these groups is way more important now than it ever has been. And I think, again, back, not to bring up pandemic times again, but that was pushed forward again in those times. For the longest time, these groups, potentially some did, obviously there's a lot of innovation that has happened, so I won't generalize, but for the most part, these groups haven't necessarily ventured out of the norm, which was, take care of the tenants, have that relationship with the tenants, drive leasing revenue through rent. There was obviously auxiliary revenue standpoint as well from that. But I think the pandemic, again, with the closure of centers, they needed to communicate with customers around curbside pickups. Hey, you can still come and pick up your packages. And we have these retailers available. I think it's way more important now than it ever has been. The ability for mall as a platform, or shopping centers as a platform, or just these different open air centers to operate as a B2C play or consumer centric play is, there's an opportunity there, I guess is the right way to say it. Is no one's really has connected or built a truly connected platform from CRM to loyalty to marketplace to curbside and delivery, which we were just talking about, to logistics. There's obviously a reverse logistics play there. There's space leasing, advertising, and sponsorships. There's so many different categories that these groups are operating, and predominantly mostly in silos. And there's an opportunity to bring together the different stakeholders within the organizations to understand what's important to all of them, and then build a truly connected platform that achieves the objectives that they were always working on, which is support tenants, as I talked about before, support tenants, rent, auxiliary revenue, but then connect with customers. There's a huge opportunity.
Yeah, and obviously it matters more for like indoor malls, outlet centers, certain types of like kind of lifestyle centers. I think, but this idea of kind of embracing the brand role and the relationship that you as the mall or the center have with your audience is really significant, because we think about the retailers obviously mean a lot to the mall and the experience that you're looking to get, but the mall very often gives something to the retailers too. And I think losing sight of that exchange it doesn't allow you to fully grasp the importance of the mall and where it could be going, how it could be evolving moving forward. I think this is one of those areas that has just huge upside from an innovation perspective.
Yeah, and think about not just, we're specifically speaking to retail. Think about all the other things that go on in a shopping center and the way the trends are moving. Just, you've got, more upscale dining happening. You've got just dining in general in restaurants and QSR that happen in the center, and how do you support them and connect that into your overall strategy? You've got services. Think about nail salons, barbershops, you name it. From a services perspective that could be built into this. Those are customer. You need to drive customers into those spots. In a lot of cases, they're not large entities running those services. They're small mom and pops. And how are you supporting them? That's something to consider. And then you get into attractions and entertainment, and how are you engaging with customers through this platform as well? Like, if you're selling tickets, in one part of your website, that's operating in a silo and you're driving traffic to there, to attractions and entertainment. How do you bring that holistically into, everything you're working on as well? There's just so much that needs to, I guess the best way to say it, it's been done so piecemeal, I think, over the last number of years, and test and learn is great. But, if you test and learn 3 different things in 3 different areas and they don't all connect together, then you're kind of back to square one, or you're running 3 different programs separately. And that's a waste of operational and CapEx, right? So, I mean, there's so many different ways to go with this.
So interesting. I didn't even think about this idea of like, forget the mall as the platform, like external, that kind of consumer facing element. But once you're in the mall, that idea of kind of connecting all these elements as a force multiplier, I was thinking about that, you talk about like, different types of service oriented tenants, that health tenant that draws someone into a mall at 2 p.m. on a Tuesday. How do I then try to keep that visitor there a little bit longer? Is there a way to, leverage one visit to drive visits elsewhere? How do I incentivize that visit? It's almost like within this environment, there has to be a way of connecting the visitor to other opportunities that are kind of caused by that visit. I mean, this is very much a space to watch. I think it's one we're going to see a lot of innovation in, especially as these top tier malls have separated themselves and look to figure out, all right, what does their next level of innovation look like? Yeah. I want to talk about an area that it's less technology oriented, but I think it's an innovation nonetheless. We are seeing many retailers focused on just different size stores. And this doesn't seem like this game-changing innovation, but we believe it unlocks really huge opportunities. Why do you think store size is such an important area for innovation, and what does it mean for retailers practically?
It's not necessarily an area of expertise for me. I'll be frank on that. So there'll probably be a little bit of back and forth on this one, but the biggest thing for me is being able to get more personalized with in your specific areas. It's understanding your demographic, understanding what the propensity for different products are, different people in your specific areas, and being able to offer that product selection based on multi-format. That's sort of where my head goes first. I don't know if you shared those same thoughts or what your thoughts are, and then we can kind of continue from there.
No, I mean, I agree with you. I think that it's almost like it starts with this element of optionality. If I have multiple formats and I have different sizes that I can utilize, all of a sudden I can hit different markets the way I want to. So whether it's, our classic example of this is Lululemon, we'll have like 3 stores within a fairly tight trade area, but they're all different sizes and they're trying to do different things. And then you look at kind of like a small format store allows you to go into an urban area where rents are a little bit higher. So, I mean, it gives you optionality, but then to maximize that optionality, it's what you said. Can you personalize what the merchandising is for that area? So one of my favorite examples, and this is an article, and I think it was in Footwear News, so I apologize if I'm getting that wrong. There was this article about Target in East Lansing, Michigan, which is right near Michigan State University, and how it was like all products that college students would want because it's right next to a college. Whereas, one in the suburbs nearby had a totally different product mix. And I think that ability to target and create something effective is super exciting. And then you get this mix of, I have lots of options, I can personalize, and then I get this network of stores. So if I have a big store, maybe I can use some of the extra space for fulfillment and distribution. A small store is about trying on, and it can leverage that distribution for delivery. Like, how do I start looking at these stores as part of a wider, cohesive network, as opposed to I go into one place, do they have it or not?
Right. I think the other challenge, and you kind of brought it up, was stores in college towns or in transient cities or transient towns where it could be in the summer their population goes up from 10,000 people to 200 or 100,000 people, right? Like, what size of format to store do you put in there? Because in the off season it won't really be supported, and you won't have the same propensity from a shopping standpoint. It's the same with college towns, to your point. 8 months of the year, there's people there, there's a ton of students, the population increases. So I don't know the answer, but that's the thing to consider. To your point, if you've got a larger format store, do you use it for other opportunities? It's interesting for sure.
I mean, there's something about that combating seasonality. I think the key is you just incentivize professors to fail students, and then they need summer school.
Right.
I mean, that's my innovation here.
Yeah. Sure. Yeah.
One area we talk about a lot is, and we hear it talked about a lot in retail, is this idea of how to enhance loyalty. And so, there's a lot of really exciting things. One of our favorite examples is Starbucks Red Cup Day, where you get a red cup and you get a coffee in it, and that's amazing. But even better, Starbucks has you sign up for their loyalty program in order to access it. So all of a sudden they now have you within their kind of wonderful web. And, as someone who loves being part of that web, it's great. But it's a really kind of brilliant multi-phased approach to how do we make loyalty a real thing here? And I think it's a place that receives a lot of attention in retail and prop tech. What are the big trends from your perspective to watch in this space?
I mean, you look at what McDonald's has done in a very short period of time, with I would say that's probably one of, in recent memory, outside of Starbucks and a few others, that's probably been one of the most well executed loyalty programs. You probably know the numbers off by heart in terms of increase in users and all of that sort of stuff. But I mean, you always expect technology glitches with this sort of stuff, right? You expect something to fail. From day one, it's been a home run, at least in my opinion, with them. The ability to, for them to understand more about their customers. I think that's always the biggest piece with loyalty, right? Is are you learning enough about the customer to incentivize them properly with personalized offers or personalized products, or communicate with them? There's a number of retailers I know in my past that I've been a part of email lists, let's say, and they send me completely irrelevant, even though they know my shopping history, completely irrelevant products, no cross sell, none of that sort of stuff that's happening from a loyalty standpoint. And you lose me, and you lose the customer if you're not in tune with that. I would say it really just needs to be connected to the CRM platform of their choice. And if you've got a strong CRM that's feeding into, it kind of goes back to what we talked about, mall as a platform, but retail as a platform, if it's feeding into all of your other programs, then it's sort of bulletproof at that point.
That's such a great point. It is one of these areas where we talk about, we're talking about personal shopping a lot. It's this kind of really unique opportunity to offer, as something, again, it's the middle of the week, it's the middle of the day, your staff is sitting there, it's not crowded. Can you offer someone personal shopping a la Best Buy or Chanel now to kind of bring in this more interesting experience? But I think that gaining information about the customer, like, what do I want? So that when you're sending me these emails, I think I'd look, wonderful in certain outfits, but if that I love polo shirts and khakis, show me the good stuff, right? Or show me the things that are relevant, or kind of auxiliary and kind of augment that look I'm kind of seeking out. I think that's where there's a lot of interesting excitement. I agree with you. It really starts with that CRM. How do you understand your customer? How do you kind of keep that stuff together? I think it's a really important point. Another area, and it's kind of similar to the different store sizes, is the different store concepts. And so one of our favorites is, when kind of Dollar General launched Pop Shelf, they said they wanted to aim a little bit higher from an income perspective, provide a slightly different product mix. And we've seen thus far that it's a really interesting kind of complementary piece to their retail approach. When you think of those who are experimenting with new concepts like Bloomingdale's and Bloomies and others, why do you think these are so exciting? What do you think kind of is the approach that needs to be taken to figuring out where these are?
I think one of the things that excites me, and again, this is just my own opinion, is these small format stores or shops, if you will, that gives sort of the opportunity to revitalize a lot of, we talked about downtown cores and high streets and this sort of stuff before. A lot of them are hurting in different cases, and rents are going up. A lot of small tenants can't hold the rents, and it's turning over. And in a lot of cases, there's a lot of towns and cities with sort of dead zones from, or ghost towns, if you will, from those downtown cores. I think there's a huge opportunity with these smaller formats of these larger brands to not only come in and help revitalize these cores, but that also then props up the smaller tenants as well. It's driving traffic to those areas that you may not have been getting before it just brings more attention. It's almost like an anchor, right, in a mall where you've got those anchor stores and it brings traffic to all of the other tenants. Same thing with these small formats. I know there's a lot of other benefits that we'll get into around them, but I was thinking about this last night around, what's really interesting is that you could plop these in. They're going to pay the rent too. They're not going anywhere, and there's a unique opportunity to speak to a different type of customer than your typical sort of mall shopper. I think that's really, really unique with these different types of store formats.
That's interesting. I think the other element, and we didn't set aside a slide for it because kind of, as a data company, it seems a little bit kind of too self-serving, but it's this ability to measure what these stores mean. What does it mean for the new eyeballs? What does it mean for the traffic? How do you kind of show these other benefits that you get from it, as opposed to just kind of, again, not saying sales per square foot, and sales is not an important metric, it's a critical metric. But there's these other elements if you want to properly evaluate what these concepts and these locations mean. We got in a few questions. If anyone else has any, we have 2 more slides and we're going to get to a couple, so please shoot those over. But I think, and by the way, this is a heads up of a new feature that we're launching, which is our targeted search feature, which allows you to look at essentially cluster retail locations based on a whole series of questions. So we were really fascinated by when there was issues of, how do we deal with, a lack of formula? So which areas have really high birth rates? And, so all these really interesting questions you could potentially answer by clustering retail locations together, whether by chain or by region. I think one of the challenges that's been really big, Jesse, is supply chain, and it's a massive obstacle, but it's also, there's presented this opportunity for ways to invest in overcoming it. What are the key innovations that you're seeing to better deal with the supply chain?
Again, not a huge area of expertise for myself, but I mean, back to the formula shortage. I was in the midst of having my second child at the time when the formula shortage was happening. So, there's a mass panic around that, but I think and even going back to, I hate talking about the pandemic, but going back to the pandemic when, everything shut down and there was supply chain issues, I think it just creates better opportunities to plan. The planning teams, supply chain teams within, and operational teams within, retail formats and different groups. You're still seeing the ramifications of a lot of stuff happening right now on accounts per poor planning. There's inventory issues still happening. I think it just creates an opportunity to invest more in this space and make it more of an opportunity. I think for the longest time, it was just, things were rolling. It was just a cog in the flywheel of, hey, if I order these products, we're going to get it, in X amount of time, and it's going to be here because that's what we're used to seeing. But I think there's definitely an opportunity to invest more in the space and find optimization tools to understand. Again, we talked about seasonality before, but what are your top selling products? What are the top products in terms of need when it comes to, you're not that you're disaster planning, but you need to look at different, there's hurricane zones in the US. They do that already. So I think you need to take that more of a holistic approach to just your planning cycles and understanding that.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a great point. It kind of goes back to what we were discussing earlier of, personalization at the store level. I'll give you it's a silly example, but I think it's one that's pretty apt. I was in South Florida at my in-laws before Passover, and the Publix near their home had this massive, hey, it's almost Passover, look at all these food items we have. Now, if you had that same store in an area where there aren't a lot of, Jewish people, it wouldn't be as successful. So I think understanding how do you bring the right experiences and products to the right people in the right locations, it's a game-changing idea. And I think it's coming. Like, I think we're seeing brands get really good at it. We're seeing more data become available to help those who aren't as good get there. I think it's a pretty exciting kind of little, innovation.
Just depends how much, consumers are willing to opt in, right? And that's the other downside of it. If they're not opting in and not giving you the data, then, it's harder to plan.
Yeah, absolutely. I want to get to one last slide, and then we got a couple of questions I would love to get to. So from seeing stores as distribution centers via micro-fulfillment to leveraging the ability to take in returns, how is the fundamental understanding of the space of the store changing, and what do you think it'll mean for retail?
I mean, the space in general is Yeah, I think you're right. It's being reconsidered in the sense of, how do you look at logistics overall? I mean, from do we ship from store? Do we ship from warehouse? You see so much flip flop. I don't think there's a holistic, direction or a playbook really for any retailer to make that decision. Especially around size, format. It depends on, your operational playbook and what you're comfortable with. One interesting thing around space and sort of the micro fulfillment piece that we've seen really is around returns, right? So you're seeing more and more. I know there's a company called Narvar that launched an interesting piece around reverse logistics as well. Amazon's jumped into this space with reverse logistics. They made that claim where, if you're returning packages, don't worry about it. We know you're a high propensity shopper, and we'll actually pick up the products when we go to bring your next one to you. So we'll return it for you. Don't worry about, dropping those off anywhere. All the way through to, you see a couple of companies. There's one called, Return Bear, Happy Returns, and they're setting up kiosks and shopping centers to actually take products back from the retailers, almost like Kohl's is doing with Amazon, where that partnership where you can walk to the back of Kohl's and drop products off the Amazon Dropbox basically and pick up your other Amazon packages. Same sort of thing. They're taking packages from all these different retailers and handling the returns process. To me, that's where the innovation seems to be going, is a really around consolidation of returns, and then the reverse logistics piece of back to convenience for the customer.
I mean, that's amazing. I want to get to one question that came in. What are your thoughts on buy now, pay later and its impact on retail?
From the consumer side, from the I don't know. I think it's a fancy credit card, but that's my deep down feeling on it. I think it'll be really interesting when Apple launches their buy now pay later solution and that announcement, right? With and I'm sure it sent the other big groups in that space scrambling. What we've seen from our conversations so far is there's been a big push on sort of the traditional retail play, like the Lulus and those types size formats of retail. What really hasn't been infiltrated yet, and there's a company called Uplift that's doing this around flights. That's really interesting. Affirm is doing more big ticket items, furniture specifically. Some companies are offering their own sort of payment plans. I know Canadian Tire here in Canada does their own. If you're a part of their credit card, or if you have their credit card, they actually do 0% financing terms across the payment plan. I mean, it's great. I think it drives, obviously, sales that may not have been there already, but are you marketing it to the right consumer, and is the right consumer using that? That's not going to get into a world of hurt from consumer debt. So I think there's a place for it. Really interesting to see how the Apple launch of their product goes, because it could really sort of upend the game, except at that higher ticket volume, which there are some players in that space making a dent.
That's super interesting. Jesse, thank you so much for joining us today. This was a pleasure as expected. And thank you everyone for joining us. Our next webinar is going to be in early August, where we're going to do what we do every early August. We're going to look at malls, and we're going to be doing so with Colin Shaughnessy, Vice President of Leasing at URW. And we'll have potentially another guest alongside with him to be named later to keep things interesting. So please join us then. Jesse, thank you so much for being here. Avi, thank you so much for joining. Have a wonderful rest of your day.